Welcome fam, please kindly like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments section. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she placed the carefully wrapped package on the coffee table. The living room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights. Their third Christmas together as husband and wife should have been perfect, but a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She had spent countless nights over the past 3 months designing and knitting this cashmere scarf for Marcus. The midnight blue yarn had cost her nearly a week's worth of her teaching salary, but she had wanted it to be special. Each stitch held a tiny piece of her heart, her dreams of their future together woven into the intricate pattern. Emma smoothed a loose strand of hair behind her ear and swallowed hard. "This one's special," she whispered, sliding the gift toward him. Marcus looked up from his phone, that half-distracted expression she'd grown too familiar with lately, clouding his features. He set his device down and picked up the package, weighing it in his hands. "Feels light," he commented, already sounding disappointed. "Open it," Emma urged, her voice barely audible over the holiday music playing softly in the background. She leaned forward, anticipation making her chest tight. This was the first piece she truly felt proud of, something that captured her growing skill and artistic vision. Maybe this time he would see what she saw in handcrafted gifts. The love, the personalization, the irreplaceable uniqueness of something made specifically for him. Maybe this time he would understand why she preferred giving something made with her own hands rather than bought from a store. Marcus tore through the wrapping paper with efficient, disinterested motions. Emma watched his face, searching for a flicker of appreciation or joy. The scarf unfurled in his hands like a waterfall of midnight blue, the pattern catching the light as it cascaded across his lap. For a brief moment, something like surprise registered in his eyes, but it quickly faded. His lips curved into what Emma instantly recognized as his forced smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Another homemade scarf," he said, his tone carefully neutral but underlined with disappointment. "It's nice." "Thanks." Emma's heart sank, but she maintained her hopeful expression. "It's cashmere," she explained, reaching out to touch this soft material. "I found this amazing yarn shop downtown. The pattern is inspired by constellations. See how these stitches form Orion's belt? I remembered you pointing out those stars on our first date." Marcus nodded absently, already reaching for his phone again. A text notification had lit up the screen, and his attention shifted immediately. Emma caught the slight eye roll, the almost imperceptible smirk that crossed his face as he glanced between the scarf and his phone. "That's thoughtful," he said, but Emma could feel the hollowness in his words. He folded the scarf hastily and set it aside, then picked up the small box he'd gotten her. "Your turn." Inside was a department store bracelet, beautiful but impersonal, still bearing the price tag he'd forgotten to remove. When she looked up, Marcus was already scrolling through his phone, half turned away from her, the moment lost. That night, as Emma cleaned up the wrapping paper and ribbons scattered across the living room floor, she heard Marcus's voice drifting from his office. The door was slightly ajar, and she hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but his laughter, genuine, uninhibited laughter she rarely heard these days, caught her attention. "I know, right?" Marcus was saying, his voice light with amusement. "Another handmade gift. It's like living with someone who thinks we're still in college." A pause, then more laughter. "She keeps making these scarves and sweaters like something from a flea market. I mean, I appreciate the thought, but come on. We can afford real gifts now." Emma froze, the colorful paper crumpling in her suddenly tight grip. She pressed her back against the wall, hard hammering. "I told her last year I wanted that Mont Blanc watch," Marcus continued. "Instead, I got hand-painted cufflinks. They look like a child made them." Another laugh. "I know she's trying to be special or whatever, but it's getting embarrassing." Remember last month's dinner party at Ryan's? His wife got that designer handbag and mine gives him arts and crafts. The words hit Emma like physical blows. Each syllable sliced through the careful bubble of self-confidence she'd been nurturing about her creations. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. For 3 years, she'd been perfecting her craft, taking classes, investing in quality materials. She'd thought her skills were improving, that her gifts were becoming more sophisticated. But in Marcus' eyes, she was still making childish arts and crafts, embarrassing him in front of their increasingly affluent social circle. The months following that Christmas marked the slow death of Emma's creative confidence. She stopped, leaving her knitting projects in the living room. The sewing machine that once occupied a corner of their shared office was packed away in the guest room closet. When Marcus's birthday approached in March, she didn't spend weeks planning a handmade gift. Instead, she bought an expensive watch, not the blank he'd wanted, but a similar style she could afford on her teacher's salary. His eyes had lit up when he opened it, his approval warming her momentarily. But something inside her head dimmed each time her fingers itched to create, to design, to make something unique. She remembered his words like something from a flea market. She began to see her handmade items through his eyes. Amourish, embarrassing, inadequate. The fabric and yarn she'd collected sat untouched in drawers. When friends admired the hand-knit sweater she wore to dinner one evening and asked if she'd made it, she felt Marcus tense beside her. Just a hobby, she dismissed quickly, changing the subject. At night, when she couldn't sleep, Emma would sometimes creep from their bed to leaf through her design notebooks, running her fingers over sketches of patterns and garments she now believed would never see completion. Dreams she once had of perhaps someday selling her creations seemed childish now. Who would want them if her own husband found them embarrassing? Gradually, imperceptibly, the light in Emma's eyes when she spoke about textiles and design began to fade. The beautiful invisible box where she had kept her dreams grew smaller, tighter until she could barely breathe. 8 months after that Christmas, Marcus came home late one evening, his expression uncharacteristically animated. Emma had just finished grading papers, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "I've met someone," he announced without preamble, standing in the doorway of their bedroom. The words hung in the air between them, both impossible and somehow not surprising at all. Emma sat very still, her red pen poised over a student's essay. "Her name is Vivian," Marcus continued when Emma didn't respond. "She works in luxury brand management." He paused, searching for words. "She's dynamic, connected. She knows everyone who matters in this city." Emma finally looked up, meeting his gaze. She should have felt devastated, but instead found herself oddly numb. "How long?" she asked quietly. Marcus had the decency to look uncomfortable. 3 months, he admitted. "It wasn't planned, Emma. But we've grown apart. You have to see that." And the truth was, she did see it. They had been living parallel lives for longer than she cared to admit. He had been climbing the corporate ladder, cultivating relationships with the city's elite, while she taught middle school art and suppressed her creative impulses to avoid his judgment. When Marcus moved out 2 weeks later, Vivian was already a fully formed presence in his life. Polished, sophisticated, dripping in designer labels. Emma caught glimpses of her when Marcus came to collect more of his things. Perfectly manicured nails, immaculate makeup, clothes that whispered of wealth and status. Everything Emma with her paint-stained fingers and practical wardrobe was not. The divorce proceedings were mercifully quick. Marcus was generous with the financial settlement, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps to expedite the process. So he could move on with Vivian. Emma didn't fight for the house. It had never really felt like hers anyway, with its stark minimalist design that Marcus had insisted upon. She left with surprisingly little. Some clothes, books, her teaching materials, and a few personal mementos. At the bottom of her largest suitcase, wrapped in tissue paper, lay her sewing kit and a small bundle of premium yarns and fabrics she couldn't bear to leave behind. No dramatic confrontations marked her departure. No screaming matches or thrown objects that would give the neighbors something to gossip about. Just a quiet exit on a Tuesday afternoon while Marcus was at work. She left her keys on the kitchen counter alongside a brief note. "I hope you find what you're looking for." The apartment she rented was in a different part of the city, a modest one-bedroom in an older building with good natural light. It was all she could afford on her teacher's salary, but the windows faced east and morning sunlight spilled across the worn hardwood floors. The first night alone, Emma sat cross-legged on her bare mattress, the only furniture she had so far, and looked around at the empty space. The silence was deafening, but somewhere beneath the loneliness and uncertainty, she felt something else stirring, a fragile sense of possibility. This space, however small, was entirely hers. No one to judge her choices or mock her creations. No one to make her feel small. The first 3 months in her new apartment were a study in minimalism, born of necessity rather than aesthetic choice. Emma slept on a mattress on the floor. She ate simple meals at a folding table she bought second-hand, using a single plate, a single fork, a single cup. The walls remained bare, the windows undressed. After rent and utilities, her teacher's salary left little for luxuries. More than once, she stood in the grocery store calculating whether she could afford both fresh vegetables and the block of cheese she craved. She accepted extra tutoring hours and weekend shifts at a local cafe to make ends meet. The work left her exhausted, collapsing into bed at night with aching feet and a mind too tired to dwell on the life she'd left behind. But even in this stripped-down existence, there were moments of unexpected grace. The elderly neighbor who brought her homemade soup. The cafe owner who insisted she take leftover pastries home. The student who drew her a picture titled "Miss Emma's art class is the best." These small kindnesses became anchors in the storm of her transition. Most nights, Emma was too tired to unpack the creative supplies still nestled at the bottom of her suitcase. The sewing kit remained untouched, the luxury yarns forgotten. The idea of creating anything felt distant, belonging to another version of herself she could barely remember. Her hands, once so eager to shape and make, now carried trays of coffee, grated papers, scrubbed countertops. When she looked at them in the harsh bathroom light, she hardly recognized them as her own. The turning point came on a sleepless night in October, 6 months after leaving Marcus. Emma had been staring at the ceiling for hours, listening to the rhythmic hum of a faulty street light outside her window. The sound had annoyed her for weeks, but tonight it seemed almost companionable in the loneliness of 3 a.m. She got up, wrapped herself in a blanket, and sat by the window, watching the light flicker. Below, the city was mostly dark, with only occasional cars passing. In this strange liminal hour, something shifted in Emma. She crossed the room to where her suitcase still sat partially unpacked. Kneeling, she removed the stack of books and winter sweaters she'd piled on top and reached for the tissue-wrapped bundle at the bottom. The cashmere yarn felt like an old friend in her hands, soft, familiar, waiting. Emma found her knitting needles and, without planning what she would make, began to cast on stitches. The familiar rhythm of the work soothed her. Knit, purl, yarn over, knit two together. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. By dawn, she had created the beginnings of a scarf unlike any she had made before. The pattern was complex, asymmetrical, unconventional, reflecting the broken pieces of her life rearranged into something new. She held it up to the first rays of sunrise filtering through her window. The light caught the subtle variations in the midnight blue yarn, illuminating depths she hadn't noticed before. For the first time in months, Emma felt something like peace. Not happiness, not yet, but a quiet sense of returning to herself. Emma didn't tell anyone about her renewed interest in creating. It felt too fragile, too personal to share. She worked during the day and crafted at night, transforming her small apartment into an informal studio. A corner of her living room became dedicated to her supplies, organized in plastic bins from the dollar store. She learned to dye fabrics in her bathtub, hanging damp silk scarves from the shower rod to dry. She sold her first piece almost by accident. After weeks of gentle encouragement, her colleague May had convinced her to create an Etsy listing for one of her handmade silk scarves. Just to see, May had said, "You have nothing to lose." Emma had reluctantly agreed, photographing the scarf draped over the back of her folding chair, the morning light catching its subtle gradient of indigo and violet. She wrote a brief description, set what she thought was a reasonable price, and promptly forgot about it. 3 days later, the notification appeared. "Is this available? I'd love to purchase this piece." Emma stared at the message in disbelief. Someone wanted to buy something she had made, not out of obligation or pity, but because they genuinely desired it. With trembling fingers, she replied, confirming the scarf was available. The transaction completed smoothly, and Emma carefully packaged her creation, wrapping it in tissue paper and including a handwritten note thanking the buyer. As she watched the postal worker take the package, a tiny ripple of hope stirred in her chest. That evening, she created 2 more listings. By the end of the week, she had sold 3 pieces. The reviews began to trickle in. Exquisite craftsmanship, even more beautiful in person, like wearing a piece of art. Summer turned to fall, and Emma's small Etsy shop gained a modest following. Each sale felt like a personal validation, a quiet rebellion against the voices Marcus voice that had dismissed her work as amateurish. She developed a signature style, organic shapes, subtle color transitions, unexpected textures. On weekends, she began visiting local craft fairs, setting up a small table with her scarves and shawls carefully arranged. The face-to-face interaction with customers taught her what drew people to her work. "They have soul," one woman told her, running her fingers along the edge of a handmade shawl. "You can feel the story in them." Emma hadn't realized her creations carried her story, her pain, her resilience, her slow healing. But perhaps they did. In November, a local lifestyle blogger approached her table at the downtown holiday market. The woman spent nearly 30 minutes examining Emma's pieces, asking thoughtful questions about techniques and inspiration. 2 weeks later, Emma's phone notifications exploded with Etsy alerts. The blogger had featured her work in a write-up titled "Hidden Gems, Soulful Story Woven Luxury." The article praised the understated elegance and emotional depth of Emma's designs. In a world of mass-produced luxury, these pieces offer something different. Authenticity and artistry that can't be replicated, the blogger wrote. By evening, Emma had sold every piece listed in her shop and received a dozen custom orders. She sat on her couch, a real couch now, purchased with her earnings, and scrolled through the orders in stunned silence. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider a possibility. This could be more than a hobby. This could be a future. With careful planning, Emma invested every penny of profit back into her growing business. She upgraded her materials, purchasing higher quality silks and wools from ethical sources. She converted her spare closet into a dyeing station with proper ventilation, she hired a professional photographer to capture her pieces, no longer relying on amateur shots taken in her living room. The orders continued to come in, and Emma developed a wait list for custom pieces. By spring, she faced a difficult decision. Balancing teaching with her growing business had become increasingly challenging. She often worked until midnight, fulfilling orders after a full day of classes. The principal called her into his office one afternoon, concerned about her evident exhaustion. "You're one of our best teachers, Emma," he said kindly. "But something has to give." That night, Emma spread her financial records across her kitchen table. With a teacher's caution, she calculated and recalculated. The numbers didn't lie. Her business was now generating more income than her teaching position. With a business loan, she could expand further, perhaps even open a small studio space. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. 2 weeks later, with trembling hands, she submitted her resignation letter to the school. Her colleagues threw her a farewell party, presenting her with a gift card to her favorite fabric supplier. To new beginnings, May toasted, raising her plastic cup of sparkling cider. Emma raised her own cup, a strange mixture of grief and excitement swirling in her chest. She would miss the children, the classroom community she had built. But for the first time in her adult life, she was choosing herself, her passion, her vision, her art. Emma named her brand Silently Yours, a tribute to the quiet resilience that had carried her through her darkest days. She rented a small studio space in an Upand Cominging Arts District, a former industrial building now housing various creative businesses. The space was modest but filled with light, with high ceilings and exposed brick walls that created the perfect backdrop for her creations. She deliberately kept her operation small and exclusive, focusing on quality over quantity. Each piece was individually crafted, personally designed, no mass production, no shortcuts. Her business model was unconventional in the digital age. She maintained no social media presence, no flashy marketing campaigns. Instead, she relied entirely on word of mouth and the loyalty of her growing clientele. The approach seemed to enhance rather than hinder her appeal. In a world of constant digital noise, the whispered recommendation of a secret luxury brand carried a certain mystique. "You have to know someone who knows someone" became the unofficial slogan among her customers. When asked why she maintained such a low profile, Emma would smile and say simply, "The work speaks for itself." And it did. Her client list grew to include art collectors, gallery owners, the quieter sort of celebrities who valued craftsmanship over labels. She never saw publicity or sent free products to influencers. Yet somehow her pieces began appearing in exclusive circles, spotted at gallery openings, literary events, intimate gatherings of the cultural elite. Emma remained behind the scenes, creating in her sunlit studio, letting her work six its own way in the world. 3 years after founding Silently Yours, Emma received an invitation that changed everything. The curator of a prestigious textile arts exhibition wanted to feature her work in their annual showcase. The event was known for launching artisans into the upper echelons of the design world. Emma accepted with characteristic understatement, sending a simple handwritten note of thanks. The exhibition was scheduled for early October, giving her 6 months to create a cohesive collection that would represent her artistic vision. Emma threw herself into the work, experimenting with new techniques while staying true to her signature style. The collection would tell a story, her story through fabric and form. On the evening of the exhibition opening, Emma arrived early, taking a moment alone in the gallery before the crowds arrived. Her pieces were displayed against stark white walls, dramatically lit to emphasize their complex textures and subtle color variations. Seeing them arranged this way out of her studio and in the formal setting of the gallery, Emma felt a surge of quiet pride. They belonged here. She belonged here. The opening was a blur of faces and conversations. Art critics, fashion journalists, collectors, all wanting to meet the woman behind Silently Yours. Emma navigated the attention with quiet grace, discussing her techniques and inspirations without revealing too much of her personal journey. Near the end of the evening, as the crowd thinned, she noticed a familiar face across the room. Vivian Marcus' wife was examining one of Emma's signature scarves with obvious admiration, running her perfectly manicured fingers along the hand-dyed silk. Emma watched from a distance as Vivian spoke animatedly with the gallery assistant, gesturing toward the scarf. Their conversation ended with Vivian's smile faltering slightly. She glanced at the price tag once more, then reluctantly moved away from the piece. Curiosity piqued. Emma discreetly approached the assistant after Vivian had moved to another part of the gallery. The woman who was just here. Did she have a question about the blue gradient piece? The assistant nodded. She was very interested in purchasing it, but she hesitated. The card was declined. Emma finished for her, understanding immediately. The assistant looked uncomfortable. She said she'd return with another payment method. These things happen sometimes. Emma nodded, thanking the assistant before moving away. She caught glimpses of Vivian throughout the remainder of the evening, always elegantly dressed, always in the company of people who seemed important. Yet something about her demeanor suggested a performance, a careful maintenance of appearance, perhaps not fully supported by reality. Later that night, as Emma was preparing to leave, she overheard Vivian speaking to a small group of women near the gallery entrance. "Of course, I have 3 of her pieces already," Vivian was saying, her voice carrying the particular resonance of someone ensuring they're overheard. "This exhibition is lovely, but her private collection is far superior." Emma slipped past unnoticed, a small knowing smile playing at her lips. The lie was transparent, but she found she couldn't begrudge Vivian her pretense. Everyone had their own masks to wear, their own appearances to maintain. In the car heading home, Emma reflected on the strange encounter. Marcus and Vivian must be struggling financially if a luxury purchase was beyond their reach. The thought brought her no pleasure, only a detached sense of life's unpredictable currents. 2 weeks after the exhibition, Emma received a special order request through her website. The client requested an appointment at her studio, unusual, as Emma rarely hosted clients in her workspace. Something about the formal language of the email gave her pause. But she agreed to the meeting, scheduling it for Friday afternoon. At precisely 3 o'clock, the studio door opened and Vivian stepped inside. She was impeccably dressed as always, but Emma noticed the slight tension around her eyes, the careful composure that suggested effort rather than ease. Recognition flickered across Vivian's face as she realized who Emma was. For a moment, neither woman spoke. "You're Emma," Vivian finally said, her voice carefully neutral. "Marcus' ex-wife." Emma nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor. "And you're Vivian. Welcome to Silently Yours." The awkwardness hung between them, thick and palpable. Vivian glanced around the studio, taking in the works in progress, the organized chaos of Emma's creative space. "I didn't know," she said after a moment. "When I requested the appointment, I recognized your work but not your name." Emma gestured toward a small sitting area. "Would you like some tea? Since you're here, we might as well talk." Over steaming cups of Earl Grey, an unexpected conversation unfolded. Vivian admitted she had been coveting Emma's designs for months before discovering the connection. She had seen one of Emma's scarves on a colleague and become obsessed with owning one herself. When she had finally saved enough for the purchase, she had discovered the maker's identity by chance, reading the small tag sewn into the hem, "Silently Yours" by Emma Hayes. The revelation had been shocking. The woman Marcus had once dismissed as making flea market crafts was now a celebrated artisan whose pieces Vivian couldn't afford. By the end of their conversation, an unlikely understanding had formed between the two women. Vivian revealed with careful pride that she and Marcus were making adjustments in their lifestyle, a polite euphemism for financial strain. Marcus' company had undergone restructuring. His position downgraded. They had been forced to sell their luxury apartment and move to a smaller home in a less prestigious neighborhood. The information should have felt like vindication, but Emma found herself feeling only compassion for Vivian, who seemed to be handling the transition with dignity. As Vivian prepared to leave, she paused by a display of Emma's newest scarves. "They really are extraordinary," she said softly. "I can see why they've become so coveted." Emma made a sudden decision. She selected one of her simpler pieces. Still beautiful, but one she could afford to part with. "Take this," she said, pressing the folded silk into Vivian's hands. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill." Vivian hesitated, surprised by the offer. "I couldn't possibly." "Please," Emma interrupted. From one woman to another, no strings attached. After Vivian left, Emma sat alone in her studio, processing the strange encounter. For years ago, she couldn't have imagined this turn of events. Her designs coveted by the woman who had replaced her. Her creative work valued beyond what her ex-husband's new wife could afford. But the victory felt hollow. True satisfaction came not from others' recognition or from comparative success, but from the daily joy of creating work that expressed her authentic self. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, Emma returned to her workbench, hands already reaching for silk and dye. The act of creation itself, was the real triumph. The ripples from the textile exhibition spread further than Emma could have anticipated. A feature in a prestigious design magazine led to international recognition. Influencers began posting about the elusive, Silently Yours brand, creating a mystique around Emma's limited production and exclusive clientele. Wait lists for her pieces stretched to months, then years. Luxury retailers approached with collaboration offers, but Emma declined them all, preferring to maintain complete creative control over her work. As her business grew, she expanded thoughtfully, hiring 2 apprentices, both former art students with talent and vision. She taught them her techniques, her philosophy of quality over quantity, her reverence for materials. They worked alongside her in the now expanded studio space, learning not just the craft, but the business model that had made Silently Yours a silent revolution in the luxury market. Authentic luxury isn't about labels or status, Emma explained to them. It's about intention, craftsmanship, and the story embedded in each piece. Articles began describing her approach as anti-luxury luxury. A contradiction that amused Emma, but also captured something true about her brand. In a market saturated with mass-produced status symbols, her handcrafted limited edition pieces represented a different kind of exclusivity, one based on artistry rather than accessibility. Emma's personal life evolved alongside her professional success. She moved from her small apartment to a modest but beautiful home with a dedicated studio space. She cultivated friendships with other artists and craftspeople, built a community around shared creative values. She began dating again cautiously, selectively, eventually finding companionship with a sculptor who understood the demands and rewards of creative work. Her life was full, rich with purpose and connection. 5 years after leaving Marcus, Emma rarely thought about her former life. The memories had lost their sting, fading into the background of her busy, fulfilling existence. Until one evening, scrolling through a design blog feature on her latest collection, she spotted a comment that caught her attention. "Just found out my ex-wife is the genius behind Silently Yours. Still processing." The username was anonymous, but Emma knew. She could feel the truth of it. Marcus had discovered her success. She closed her laptop, uncertain how to feel about this development. Not triumph, not exactly. Something more complex. The quiet acknowledgement of how far she had come, how completely she had transformed her pain into purpose. The next morning, an email appeared in her business account from Marcus asking for a meeting. Emma's finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. She agreed to coffee at a neutral location, a small cafe near her studio. When she arrived, Marcus was already seated, looking older than she remembered, more subdued. The confident swagger had diminished, replaced by something more tentative. They exchanged awkward greetings before settling into conversation. "I had no idea," he said finally, "about your business, your success." Emma sipped her coffee, waiting. "I see your work everywhere now," he continued. "That actress in the new Netflix series was wearing your scarf in the promotional photos. And last month at a client dinner, the CEO's wife was showing off her Silently Yours wrap like it was made of gold." Emma nodded, acknowledging the information without comment. "I've been thinking about those handmade scarves you used to make me," Marcus said, his voice quieter now. "The ones he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "The ones you laughed at," Emma supplied gently without rancor. Marcus winced but nodded. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I didn't see what was right in front of me." The conversation with Marcus left Emma reflective but ultimately unchanged. His acknowledgement of his past dismissiveness was validating in some small way, but she no longer needed that validation. Her worth, both personal and professional, had been established on her own terms through her own efforts. Life continued its forward momentum. The following spring, Emma was invited to host a gala for the city's Arts Foundation, a black tie event celebrating artisans and craftspeople whose work had elevated the cultural landscape. She accepted the honor with characteristic grace, understanding that her presence would serve as inspiration for other artists finding their way. The evening of the gala arrived crisp and clear, stars visible above the city skyline. Emma stepped from her car wearing a gown she had designed and created herself. A flowing masterpiece of hand-dyed silk in shades of midnight blue, embellished with subtle hand embroidery that caught the light as she moved. As she walked the red carpet, cameras flashed. Art critics, fashion journalists, and cultural commentators all vied for her attention. Emma moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. No longer the woman who had once trembled as she offered a handmade gift to an unappreciative husband. Inside the venue, she took her place at the head table, surveying the gathered crowd of influential artists, patrons, and cultural icons. Marcus was not on the guest list. His social circle had never intersected significantly with the arts community, but his absence or presence would have made no difference to Emma. He belonged to a chapter of her life that had closed. This evening, this moment belonged entirely to her present and future. When it came time for her speech, Emma approached the podium with measured steps. She spoke about the transformative power of craft, the dignity of creating with one's hands, the courage required to pursue artistic vision in a world that often values speed over quality, profit over purpose. The audience hung on her every word, recognizing the authenticity behind her success. 1 week after the gala, Emma sent a carefully packaged box to her old address, the house where Marcus and Vivian now lived. Inside was one of her most exquisite creations, a cashmere scarf in deep midnight blue with a constellation pattern woven subtly into the fabric. The accompanying note read simply, "For the woman I used to be, thank you for leaving." Emma never knew if Marcus understood the significance of the gift. If he recognized the echo of that long-ago Christmas scarf that had once been deemed like something from a flea market. It didn't matter. The gesture wasn't for him. It was for her. A closing of the circle. A final acknowledgement of the journey from there to here. In her sunlit studio, surrounded by apprentices and works in progress, Emma continued creating. Each piece that left her hands carried something of her story. Resilience woven into fabric. Courage died into silk, triumph stitched into pattern. Her hands, once deemed inadequate by someone who couldn't see their worth, now created objects of beauty that graced the shoulders of those who understood true value. The waiting list for her pieces grew longer. The exclusive boutiques that carried her limited collection sold out within hours of receiving new stock. Magazines described her as the silent revolution in luxury craftsmanship. But Emma found her greatest satisfaction not in the acclaim or the commercial success, but in the quiet moments of creation, the meditative peace of working with her hands, the joy of bringing something new into the world. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her rejection into reinvention. And in doing so, she had discovered the most valuable luxury of all, the freedom to be entirely, authentically herself. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and transformation, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational content. Share with friends who might need a reminder that rejection can be the beginning of something beautiful. Comment below with what resonated most with you or what lessons you took from Emma's journey. Remember, sometimes our greatest successes grow from our deepest disappointments.